Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to The Analyst by Vajiraman Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 9 articles from The Hindu and The Indian Express, especially from the perspective of UPSC Civil Service Examination. In the first article, we'll talk about the recent indication of the Supreme Court to constitute the Constitution Bench in order to determine the validity of the money bill route. In the second article, we'll talk about the significant impact of heat waves and water scarcity on women in India. In the third article, we'll talk about the Pradhan Mantri School for Rising India. In the fourth article, we'll talk about the very important State Public Service Commissions. In the fifth article, we'll talk about the Indian Council of Agriculture Research as it is celebrating its Foundation Day. Finally, in the preliminary snippet section, we'll have a discussion with respect to some of the very important topics for the preliminary exam. Now, the very first article deals with the money bill. So recently, the Chief Justice of India has indicated that he is going to form the Constitution Bench to determine the validity of the money bill route taken by the government for passing various acts. Now, this becomes really important. Now, this is with respect to GS2, Indian Constitution, features, amendments, and significant provisions. Now, first, let's talk about what is Constitution Bench. See, Constitution Bench, it comprises of Supreme Court judges, and it delves into some of the very important issues which are concerned with the national impact. Any issue which can have a probable national impact, that is dealt by the Constitution Bench, right? Now, this Constitution Bench, it gives an overarching view on a question of law, and then it determines what the future of that particular law would be, right? Again, these constitution benches, these are temporary and these are dissolved once the matter is settled. Once a decision has been taken by the constitution bench, then the bench is dissolved. They are not permanent. Now, if we talk about the size of these constitution bench, what we can see is that they consist of 5 or more. So the minimum number of the judges in the constitution bench is 5, right? Now, the largest ever constitution bench which has been created was that in the Kesavananda Bharati case, where there were 13 judges in that particular constitution bench. Now, can you just tell me the doctrine, the name of the doctrine which was evolved in the Kesavananda Bharati? Let me see who answers first in the comment section, right? Now, these are constituted, these constitution bench, these are constituted. It is the sole prerogative of the Chief Justice of India. Very important, do remember, the constitution benches are formed by the Chief Justice of India. Now, there are certain sort of areas where these constitution benches can be formed. First is that if it involves a substantial question of law. What do we mean by that? So we have got Article 145, subclause 3, which deals with this substantial question of law. That is, if there needs to be an interpretation with respect to the constitution, so a constitution bench can be created. Second aspect is if the president seeks the Supreme Court's opinion. So we have got Article 143, which gives power to the President of India to seek the Supreme Court's advice. One thing must be kept in mind is that the directions which are given by the Supreme Court, they are not binding on the President. Next is if there is a conflicting judgment. What do we mean by this? Let's say we have a 2-judge bench and this gives a particular view. And then we have got a 3-judge bench. This gives a conflicting view. So in order to settle down the issue, there can be the formation of another larger bench, right? So if there is a conflicting judgment, then we can have the constitution of a new bench. Then if the judgment is different from the one delivered by the previous bench, let's say you have got a 3-judge bench and it said yes to a particular thing. Then after some years, you had a second 3-judge bench where it said no. So in order to settle this issue, in order to have a particular way out, then you can have the constitution of a new constitution bench, right? So these are the cases, these are the types of cases in which we can have the constitution of the constitution bench. Now, what is this issue in particular? See, there has been the allegation that the center has used the money bill route to pass certain key legislations. Center, that is the government, has passed many of the acts through the money bill route. For example, we have got the prevention of money laundering. We all know how important PMLA is during these days, right? Then is the Finance Act of 2017, which actually altered the tribunals functioning in the country. Then we have got the Aadhaar Act, the very important in 2016. Now, all these acts were passed through the money bill route. Now, this becomes a concern, right? Now, the opposition has alleged that the reason why the government has done this is to circumvent the scrutiny of the Rajya Sabha. See, we'll study in further that money bill has certain special features. A money bill can only be introduced in the Lok Sabha, right? So when it comes to the Rajya Sabha, it has no powers with respect to the money bill. It can only make recommendations, and that too, it is not binding on the Lok Sabha to accept those recommendations, right? So it has been alleged by the opposition that during the times when the government did not have the adequate numbers in the Rajya Sabha, it actually took the this route of money bill, right? Now, if we talk about the money bill in particular, we have got Article 110 of the Indian Constitution, which talks about the definition of the money bill. Now, in this definition of the money bill, one word is very important, and that is the only. Right. So what the article, I would repeat it, I would say it. It says, for the purpose of this chapter, a bill shall be deemed as a money bill if it contains only provisions dealing with all or any of the following matters. Now, what are these matters? The first is the imposition, abolition, remission, alteration or regulation of any tax, or it can be the regulation of the borrowing of money or giving of any guarantee by the government of India, or the amendment of law with respect to the financial obligations. Next can be the custody of the Consolidated Fund of India. Now, the Consolidated Fund of India, we all know that it is in Article 266 subclause 1, right? And then we have got Article 266 subclause 2, which deals with the public account of India. And then we have got the Contingency Fund of India, which is in 267, right? So do remember these articles. Now, the appropriation of monies out of the Consolidated Fund of India, or the declaring of any expenditure to be expenditure charged on the Consolidated Fund of India, or increasing the amount of any such expenditure. Then you have got the receipt of money on account of the Consolidated Fund of India or the public account of India, or the custody or issue of such money. Then we have got any matter incidental to or of the matters specified in subclause A to F, right? So these are only the conditions. If a matter deals with only these conditions, then it can be sort of linked as, or can be called as a part of the money bill, right? But the opposition has alleged that the center is misusing the provisions which are mentioned in the definition of the money bill. Now, coming to the special features of the money bill, what we can say is that they can only be introduced in the lower house of the parliament, that is in the Lok Sabha, and that too on the prior recommendation of the President of India. So the prior recommendation of the President of India is needed. Next is, who decides whether a particular bill is a money bill or not? So this authority is vested with the Speaker, who decides whether a particular bill is a money bill or not. Now, his certificate should be endorsed on every money bill. Whenever a bill goes from the Lok Sabha to the Rajya Sabha, or when after ratification it goes to the President, the Speaker endorses that particular bill as a money bill, right? So we have got Article 109, which talks about this endorsement. Then we have got Article 111, 111, which also talks about this endorsement. Now, what is the procedure with respect to the passage of money bill? Please understand, now this is very important, that it is an Article 109. So the procedure with respect to the passage of the money bill is given in Article 109, and the definition of the money bill is given in Article 110, 110. Now, this provides a special procedure for the passage of the money bill. Now, what it talks about is that the money bill can only be introduced in the lower house of the parliament, that is the Lok Sabha, only with the recommendation of the President. We have already talked about it. Then once it has been passed by the Lok Sabha, it is then transmitted to the Rajya Sabha, which needs to return the bill within 14 days of its recommendation. Now, these recommendations are not binding on the Lok Sabha, right? Then it is up to the Lok Sabha, as I said, to accept or reject these recommendations. In both situations, the bill is then deemed to have been passed by both the houses of the parliament. Next, when a money bill is presented to the President, he may give or withhold his assent, but he cannot return the bill for the reconsideration. Normally, the President gives his assent because it is on the basis of his recommendation that it is introduced in the lower house of the parliament, right? So these are certain very important provisions with respect to the money bill. Now, coming to this case in particular, what all acts have been actually into consideration? What all acts have been alleged to have been used this money bill route to circumvent the scrutiny by the Rajya Sabha? The first is the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. So what we saw was that it was in the year 2015, 16, 18 and 19 that significant amendments were introduced in the Prevention of Money Laundering Act through the Finance Acts. Now, the finance bills which are introduced as a part of the budget, they are introduced as money bills. But the question mark is that why did the government introduce the amendments to the Prevention of Money Laundering Act through the money bill? Now, it was in the year July 2022, that a 3-judge bench, it actually upheld the amendments and the vast powers which are given to the Enforcement Directorate. So it upheld them. Next, what the bench said was that though we are upholding the amendments which are made or the vast powers which are given to the Enforcement Directorate, however, when it comes to deciding whether the route taken, the Moneyville route taken is right or not, then they referred it to a larger bench, right? Next is the Aadhaar Act. So the Aadhaar Act was also passed as a Moneyville. Now the Supreme Court ruled in the favor of the government, right? Next, we had the Tribunal Reforms Act. Now this is important. See, we had the Finance Act of 2017, which introduced some of the very important changes when it comes to the functioning and the composition of tribunals in the country, right? It was in the case of Roger Matthews versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court considered changes made in the composition or the functioning of the tribunals is in line with constitutional principles or not. Now, what the government said was that the point of the government was that since the salaries of the members of these tribunals, they flow from the Consolidate Fund of India, we have taken the Moneyville route. However, the opposition alleged that the Moneyville route taken by the government, it was for the purpose of extending the executive control, over these tribunals, over the composition of the selection committees for these tribunals, right? And it was also alleged by the opposition that the standards of sort of the people who were to be made a part of these tribunals, the standards were downgraded, right? So that it can suit the interest of the center of the executive, right? So these were the allegations made by the opposition. Now, it was in this case, Roger Matthews, where the Supreme Court, the 5-judge bench, it struck down the law as unconstitutional, right? As it said that it interfered in the independence of the judiciary. The reason what the Supreme Court gave. Now, it referred the Moneyville aspect to a larger constitutional bench. So it is here that the Chief Justice of India has mentioned that we are going to discuss this route, whether this route taken by the government, that is the Moneyville route, is in line with the constitutional principles or not. Now, it also expressed the doubts over the 2018 verdict which upheld the Aadhaar Act, right? So that is also one of the point in concern. So it remains to be seen what the stand of Supreme Court would be. Because see, this is something which is very grave, which is very serious, because some of the very important laws, some of the very important acts have been passed through the Moneyville route. Now this raises a question mark over the credibility of the legislative process, over the credibility of the executive's intentions, right? So that is where the Supreme Court has to take a stand, and that will then determine what the future course of action would be, right? Now, before going to another topic, we have a very interesting question from the 2024 prelims. Now, the question says, which of the following statements are correct with respect to the money bill in the parliament? Article 109 mentions a special procedure in respect of the money bills. A money bill shall not be introduced in the Council of States. The Rajya Sabha can either approve the bill or suggest changes but cannot reject it. Then the amendments to the money bills suggested by the Rajya Sabha have to be accepted by the Lok Sabha. Now, select the answer using the code given below. 1 and 2 only, 2 and 3, 1, 2 and 3, 1, 3 and 4. Let me see who answers first in the comment section. Now, we have a very important mains question for this year's CSE 2024 mains. Please have a look. What do you understand by a money bill? Examine the criteria a bill needs to fulfill to be termed as a money bill. Also highlight the issues with respect to money bill. So do write an answer on. So coming to the next topic, we have got the gendered impact of heat waves. So what we saw in May 2024 and June was that the water level in some of the India's reservoirs, it actually plummeted to less than 35% of their total capacity, right? Along with severe heat waves condition. Now, it had a significant impact on the locals, on the local population. Among the local population, the most severe affected segment was the women in particular. So several studies have highlighted that, for example, we have got the ADB report, Asian Development Bank report, which the report name is The Rising Above the Heat. Now, this actually tells us about the unequal impact of the heat waves on the women in particular. So what this article highlights is the disproportionate impact of the extreme heat waves on women in particular. Now, this becomes very important because UPSC has been in a habit of asking questions linking the social aspect with the climate change aspect. Now, GS1, it deals with GS1 climate change and GS3 environment. Now, India is home to 1 in 6 women around the world. And we all know that the social indicators in India are not very positive. So that is where analyzing the gendered impact of the heat waves becomes crucial. Now, according to the Global Gender Index report, India was placed at 129th position out of 146. Now, this shows the dismal state of affairs, right? Now, the traditional role of women in India, which actually where the physical strain on the women is intensified, that combined with the effects of climate change. See, we all know that women especially in the rural parts of the country, they have to travel for so many kilometers to fetch water, right? So it induces a lot of physical strain on them, right? So these traditional role combined with the effects of climate change, it gives increased physical strain on the women, right? So that is where this topic becomes important. Moreover, there are three aspects. First is the gender dynamics, right? So we have got the gender dynamics. Second is the social norms, right? And then we have got the third, the climate change, right? So these three factors combined, they actually increase the women's vulnerability to heat stress. So we have got the gender dynamics along with the social norms, the social setup, and then we have got the climate change. So all three combined to increase the women's vulnerability when it comes to the heat stress or the heat waves. Now, if we go into the data to see whether this is real or not, so we have got the report of the United Nations, which talks about the right to water. Now, it says that on an average, women spend up to 4 hours daily on the water-related tasks. Now, this also increases the chances of waterborne illnesses for women, right? Next is the cultural norms. Now, as we have discussed, the cultural norms are patriarchal, right? So that also induces a negative impact on the women, right? So they sideline the women's health concerns. More so, that is the diseases related to the heat stress, right? So that increases the vulnerability of women. Next is limited decision-making power in the household. Now, the social setup in the country is such that, especially in the rural areas, that women are not given the adequate decision-making powers when it comes to the water management, when it comes to taking access to resources, right? So that is where the issue lies, and that increases their vulnerability. Next is, when it comes to the pregnant or the elderly women, they face more risks because of the heat stress. So according to a study done by the Asian Development Bank, what it says is that a 1 degree rise in temperature, it increases the risks of preterm births by 6%, right? So, and this number can actually go to 16% when it comes to severe heat waves condition, right? So if you have got heat wave condition, that can actually increase the chances of preterm births. More so, there can be likelihood of stillbirths. So that can increase by 5% for every 1 degree rise in temperature. So you have got this data which corresponds to the preterm birth also, which can actually rise to 16% in case of heat waves, or it can also lead to cases of stillbirths. That is for every 1 degree rise in temperature. Now, we all know that the economic opportunities, they are also affected by this heat waves. So they are severely impacted by the heat waves and droughts. Now see, agriculture is a sector where most of the labor force in India depends. And out of the total labor force, we have got a huge chunk of women who participate as agriculture laborers, right? So agriculture, that is the one side, the economic aspect. The second aspect is one of the most important sectors which is facing the highest brunt of climate change is the agriculture. It is most vulnerable, right? And that is the sector where you have got the most number of women laborers, right? So this two factors combined increases again the vulnerability of women. So there is also a negative correlation. Different studies have said that there's a negative correlation with respect to the heat waves and the agriculture yields. So as the heat waves increase, the agriculture yields decrease. Now, as I said, that 80% of the women in the rural areas, according to the Niti Aayog, they are engaged in the agriculture. Now, this increases their vulnerability. Next is that once you have got the climate change or the heat stress, it also leads to loss of biodiversity. And that is again a concern because it has an effect on the women's livelihood. So there is a loss of sustainable livelihood options for these women. Again, what we see is that almost 54% women, they reside indoors. Now, this suggests a sort of a potential refuge that if they're residing indoors, they'll be protected from the heat waves or let's say the heat stress. But we have a sort of an other case where these women are actually bearing the brunt because of the insufficient ventilation and cooling mechanisms. See, once we have women in the household, what we have is the indoor pollution, right? So that indoor pollution is also responsible for some of the very acute respiratory tract infections, right? Or bronchitis, or in fact, in some serious cases, we have got the lung cancer, right? So that is also a concern. Next is the elevated indoor temperature. Once you have got the burning of fuels inside the home for the food purpose, that increases the temperature inside the home. So we have got home-based workers. So what the Asian Development Report says, that the increase in the indoor temperature can lead to income losses of up to 30%, right? And already what we know is that women already earn less than 20% than men when it comes to the data by the ILO. So we have got the existing disparities when it comes to the incomes, and that is again going to deepen because of the effects of the heat waves. Now, see, according to National Family Health Survey 5 data, as I said, that almost 56.8% of the rural Indian families, they still depend upon the biomass for cooking the food, right? So as I said, that if you have the biomass inside the homes, it actually primarily affects the women, and then it can lead to severe acute respiratory infections, or it can lead to other respiratory tract infections, or in some extreme cases, it can also lead to lung cancer, right? So there is an increased brunt of the disease burden, and this also increases the out-of-pocket expenditure. Thus, what we see is that this heat stress or heat waves, it can deepen the existing disparities between men and women when it comes to economic opportunities or when it comes to educational opportunities, right? So there's a need to take effective measures, right? So what can be the way forward? See, we need to have a sort of a gender sensitive approach when it comes to policy and planning. What it means is that when it comes to decision making with respect to access to water resources, women should have a dominant role in that, right? They should be given, and if not a dominant role, an equitable sort of decision making power. Or when it comes to the access to resources, they also need to be made an important stakeholder, right? Now, what strategies can be adopted? First, as I said, that there's a need to promote women's leadership when it comes to deciding upon the access to resources, or when it comes to deciding upon the usage of water, right? So we can also take the help of self-help groups, right? So they can be also mobilized. Next is gender responsive policy and planning. When it comes to the policies which are framed by the top levels by the government, there is a need to incorporate the gender aspect. Also, when it comes to the budget allocation, there needs to be significant sort of diversion of funds with respect to the women in particular, with respect to girls in particular, right? Next is enhancing access to resources. Now, this is very important. Adequate provision of resources needs to be there for women and girls in particular, right? Only then they can be sort of empowered. Next is improving the education and employment opportunities. When we know that the climate change is affecting the agriculture the most, we need to have those climate resilient employment opportunities, right? Those sustainable livelihood options for these women and girls. Next is collecting sex disaggregated data. Now, this is very important when it comes to the evidence-based policy making. In order to have a structure where the data forms the base of any policy, we need to have this data, disaggregated data. Next is climate resilience and agriculture practices. We need to go on that path where we actually adopt the climate resilient agriculture. We should go for crop ecological zonation, right? So these are some of the ways in which we can actually incorporate the gender perspective in the climate resilient planning or implementation. So that is where the policymakers need to work upon and make sure that the policies, they integrate the gender perspective. Now, before going to the next topic, we have a mains question. It says, the gendered impact of the heat waves and water scarcity in India underscore the urgent need for comprehensive strategies that prioritize the well-being and the empowerment of women and girls. Discuss. Next question is, a prelims question, and this is a very easy question. Which of the following gives the Global Gender Gap Index ranking to the countries of the world? First is the World Economic Forum, the second is United Nations Human Rights Council, the third is UN Women, and the fourth is World Health Organization. So let me see who answers first in the comment section. The next topic is with respect to the PM Shri, that is Pradhan Mantri School for Rising India. Now, recently, the Education Ministry has stopped the disbursal of funds when it comes to the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan with respect to 3 states because they are effectively not implementing the PM Shri. Now, this becomes important for us to know what this scheme is all about. Now, this is a part of GS2, Social Sector Education. Now, see, Pradhan Mantri Schools for Rising India. Now, this is a centrally sponsored scheme where the central government is taking the responsibility with respect to 60% of the total funds, and the state governments have to bear the 40% of the total cost, right? So that is the sort of mechanism with respect to the financial outlay. The total financial outlay with respect to this scheme has been 27,000 crores. Right, for the next 5 years. That is from 2022-23 till 2026-27. Now, the objective, the sole aim of this particular scheme is to upgrade almost 14,500 government schools so as to make them exemplar with respect to the provisions of the National Education Policy. Right, so we all know that we have got the National Education Policy 2020. Now, this replaced the National Policy on Education of 1986. We also had an upgrade in 1992, but this was the first policy, that is the National Education Policy of 2020, which was the first education policy in the 21st century, right? So this becomes important. Now, National Education Policy 2020, this aims to transform the overall education architecture in the country, starting from the very elementary to the primary to then secondary, senior secondary, and the higher education. It aims to comprehensively transform the educational architecture in the country. Now, this is based on 5 pillars. The first is access, the second is equity, the third is affordability, the fourth is quality, and the fifth is accountability. Right. So the 5 pillars of the National Education Policy is access, equity, affordability, quality, and accountability. So you do remember this. Next is the key features of the National Education Policy are first that it aims to have a revamped structure of the educational architecture, as I told you. Then the medium of instruction has also been focused upon, where it is trying to focus upon the regional languages, right? Next is the integration of technology, very important aspect. That is, the technology needs to be integrated with respect to the provisioning of the education. Next is vocational education and skill development. It is trying to integrate the vocational aspect into the education system. Finally, we have got the foundational literacy and numeracy. So these are the key features of National Education Policy. Now, what the scheme says is that till the year 2026-27, the center would disburse the fund. After that, states have to then cater to this scheme on the basis of their own funds, right? So from 2022-23, the center will help different states to actually make exemplar schools, good quality schools in line with the National Education Policy. And after 2026-27, states will have to then carry out this policy on the basis of their own funds. Now, what are the special features when it comes to the PM Shri? First is that, as I said, that there are certain schools which are selected, and then they would be made exemplar schools, right? Now, these schools would be the idol for the other schools, showcasing all the components of National Education Policy. And then these schools would then help the mentor other schools, right? So they would be acting as mentor schools for the other schools. Next is these schools, that is the PM Shri schools, they are green schools. That is, they are incorporating the environmental aspects. Next is the pedagogy adopted in these schools is more experiential, holistic, integrated, play, toy-based, that is from the very childhood days. Then inquiry-driven, discovery-oriented, learner-centric, discussion-based, flexible, and enjoyable. So see, the overall objective of the scheme is to increase the critical thinking of the students, is to make sure that they develop robust cognitive abilities, right? So that is what they're saying, that the focus of the scheme would be on the learning outcomes of every child in every grade, right? Next is the assessment based on conceptual understanding. That is, we have got assessment system which is not based on rote learning, right? Then application of knowledge and competency based, linkage with sector skill councils and local industry. Now here, the important part is the integration of the vocational aspect, integration of the livelihood opportunities when it comes to the education, right? Then we have got school quality assurance framework. So they are actually developing a new framework so as to measure the learning out with respect to different schools, right? So this is a very important scheme. There can be a question with respect to prelims, right? So do remember. So the next article is with respect to the State Public Service Commissions. So recently, the Central Bureau of Investigation has conducted raids on the premises of the former top officials of the Chhattisgarh State Public Service Commission, right? So this becomes important. We need to know what State Public Service Commissions are. Now, this is with respect to these two constitutional bodies. Now, coming to the Public Service Commission. See, the Public Service Commissions, they are the watchdog of the merit system in the country with respect to the appointment to different civil posts, right? Now, this becomes very important. See, we have got Article 312 of the Indian Constitution, which talks about the All India services, including the All India Judicial Services. Now, the appointment to this All India services, that is actually done by the UPSC. But when it comes to the appointment with respect to the administrative services of a state, we have got the State Public Service Commissions. So do remember. Now, we have got Article 315 till 323, which in the part 14 of the Indian Constitution, which talks about the composition, the appointment, the removal of its members, and the powers and functions of both the UPSC as well as the SPSC, that is the State Public Service Commissions. Now, if we talk about the Article 315, it actually talks about the composition of the Public Service Commissions, including the UPSC and the State Public Service Commission. If we talk about the Article 316, it talks about the appointment and term of office of the members. If we talk about the Article 317, it talks about the removal and suspension of the members. If we talk about the Article 318, it talks about the powers to make regulations when it comes to the conditions of the service of the members. Now, when it comes to Article 320, it talks about the functions of the State Public Service Commissions, obviously including the UPSC, that is the Union Public Service Commission. When it comes to Article 323, it talks about the reports of these commissions being placed on the floor of the respective house, either the Parliament when it comes to the UPSC or the state legislature when it comes to the State Public Service Commissions. Now, when it comes to the State Public Service Commissions, let's talk about the appointment of members. So the members are actually appointed by the governor of that particular state. So the chairman and the members are appointed by the governor of that particular state. When it comes to the term of office, so the term of office is of 6 years or 62 years of age, whichever is earlier, right? So that is what the term of office is all about. Next is the reappointment. See, a member of a State Public Service Commission, he is ineligible for reappointment to that particular position. But if you have the chairman of the State Public Service Commission, he is eligible for appointment to be a member of the UPSC or the chairman of the UPSC. Similarly, other members of the State Public Service Commission, they're also eligible for becoming a member or the chairman of the UPSC. Now, when it comes to the resignation, whom do they submit their resignation? So they submit their resignation to the governor of that particular state, right? Now, when it comes to the removal and suspension, here one thing must be kept in mind. First, that they, though appointed by the particular governor of the state, they can only be removed by the President of India. And there are certain conditions. For example, if the president thinks that a particular member of the chairman, he is an adjudged insolvent, or if he thinks that if that particular person is engaging in any employment outside his prescribed duties, right? So if he engages in any paid employment outside his prescribed duties, he can be sort of removed. Next is that particular person can also be removed if the President of India thinks that he is suffering from infirmity of mind or body, right? So what needs to be kept in mind is, though appointed by the governor, they can only be removed by the President of India. However, the governor of a state can actually suspend a particular member or the chairman only on a reference made by the Supreme Court. Next is the power to extend the functions. Now, how can the powers of particular State Public Service Commission can be extended? See, we have got the acts of the state legislature. They can actually enhance the scope of powers when it comes to the State Public Service Commissions. Next is when it comes to the expenses of the State Public Service Commissions, they are charged on the consolidated fund of that particular state. Next is summation of reports. So this, the governor places the report of the functioning of these State Public Service Commissions on the floor of the House, along with a memorandum that why the government was not able to sort of take actions with respect to a particular policy directive given by the state public service commissions. Now, what are the functions with respect to state public service commissions? First is the conducting exams when it comes to the civil posts or civil services of that particular state. Next is consultation with the public service commissions. Now, the government has to consult these public service commissions when it comes to the method of recruitment to various civil posts or civil services, or when it comes to the appointment, promotions, and transfers from one sort of domain to the other, transfer from one particular department to the other department. Next is it also advises on all disciplinary matters. So whenever you have got a particular case where there has been an evidence of disciplinary infringement done by a particular civil servant, then there needs to be sort of consultation with respect to this particular public service commission, so as to know what can be the probable future course of action, right? Next is advise on any matter referred to them by the President of India or the Governor of the state. So the Governor of the state or the President of India can also seek their advice when it comes to the functioning of the civil services in that particular state. So what we see is that definitely these state public service commissions, they also play a very important role when it comes to being as a watchdog of the merit system in that particular state. So such instances should not be there, and there needs to be an enhancement in the transparency and the accountability of such institutions, so that credibility of such institutions can be maintained. That too, such constitutional offices can be maintained. Now the next article is with respect to the very important Indian Council for Agriculture Research. So the Indian Council for Agriculture Research is celebrating its 96th foundational day. So that is where this topic becomes important, and it has also launched a particular scheme, that is One Scientist, One Product program, right? So it is in the process of launching this. Now, it aims to improve the research in the field of agriculture and animal husbandry. Now, talking about the Indian Council of Agriculture Research, it was initially established in the year 1929, that is pre-independence, as a particular society under the Societies Registration Act of 1860. Now, it is an autonomous organization under the Department of Agriculture, Research and Education, that is under the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, and it is the apex body which is responsible for coordinating, guiding and managing research with respect to education in agriculture. Also, it includes research with respect to horticulture, with respect to animal sciences, right? Now, the Indian Council of Agriculture Research, it is the world's largest network for agriculture research and education, and it has a lot of laboratories, more than 102. We have got ICAR institutes and also 71 agriculture universities, and there are a number of laboratories which are working in the agriculture domain. Now, this is headquartered in New Delhi. Now, the Union Minister for Agriculture he serves as the president of the Indian Council of Agriculture Research. The National Agriculture Education Accreditation Board, as a part of the ICAR, is responsible for accrediting different agriculture universities in the country, those institutes which are providing agriculture related information. See, this is not mandatory, but once you have got the accreditation from this particular body, it enhances the repo of that particular institute. Now, see, ICAR has played a pioneering role when it comes to ushering the green revolution, and especially we must not forget the contributions made by Mr. M.S. Swaminathan when it comes to ushering the green revolutions in India, right? Next is it has helped raise the production multiple times since 1950 to 51 till 2017-18. For example, if we talk about the food grains, so the amount of food grains has increased by almost 5.6 times. If we talk about the horticulture products, it has increased by 10.44 times, right? If we talk about the milk production, that has increased by almost 10.5 times, right? That is from 1950 till 2017. Now, it is playing an indispensable role when it comes to achieving the SDG 0, that is zero hunger. Thus, ICAR becomes very important with respect to the agriculture research in the country, so that we can enhance the food security. We can make sure that the food security along with the nutritional aspect is also catered to. That is the reason ICAR becomes very important. Coming to the prelim snippet section, we have got the first article as Forest Advisory Committee. Now, this is a very important body when it comes to deciding upon the questions of diverting the forest land for non-forest purposes, right? So, Forest Advisory Committee, it's a statutory body. That is, it is made under a law, that is the Forest Conservation Act of 1980. So, as I said, that it considers questions with respect to the diversion of forest land for non-forest purposes and advises the particular state government. Now, once the FSC, that is the Forest Advisory Committee, it is convinced and once it approves, it may also reject it, then it is then forwarded to the concerned state government. Now, the duty of the state government is to make sure that the provisions with respect to the Forest Rights Act are also followed. So we have got the Forest Rights Act, which provides a particular set of rights to the scheduled tribes and the traditional forest dwellers. So the state government has to make sure that these rights are also actually these people are entitled to. Then the users of the land must provide the compensatory land for afforestation. Also, the entity which is actually utilizing the particular forest resource, that should give the net present value. So that is the reason the Forest Advisory Committee becomes very important. Next is the Foreigners Tribunal. So see, these are the quasi-judicial bodies, right? Their task is to determine whether a person staying illegally, he is a foreigner or not. Now, these are constituted under the Foreigners Tribunal Order of 1964, which was actually constituted under the Section 3 of the Foreigners Act of 1946. Now, the Foreigner Tribunals Order of 1964, it applies to the whole of India. Yet, what we need to keep in mind is that the Foreigners Tribunals, they exist only in Assam as of now. When it comes to the other states, if an illegal immigrant is found, he is actually produced before a local court and then it is dealt with according to the provisions of the Foreigners Act of 1946. Now, prior to the 2019 amendment to the Foreigner Tribunals Order, only the center was entitled to establish foreigner tribunals in different states. However, now the power has been granted to states as well. The persons excluded from the final draft of the National Register for Citizens, they are actually, which was released in August 2019, they can appeal before the foreigner tribunals so that they can prove their citizenship. That is the reason foreigner tribunals is important. Now, coming to the next topic, that is the Airport Authority of India. Now, this is a very important body and it's a statutory body. Again, this becomes important because UPSC has been in a tendency to ask whether a particular body is a constitutional body or a statutory body or under the executive order of the central government or the state government. So do remember, it's a statutory body under the Directorate General of Civil Aviation. Now, this comes under the Ministry of Civil Aviation. Now, as I said, it was made under the Act of the Parliament. Now, it was formed after merging the National Airports Authority and the International Airports Authority of India. The Airport Authority of India is a very important body because it manages almost 137 airports all around the country, which includes 24 international airports, 10 customs airports, and other airports also. Now, the Airport Authority of India also provides the air traffic management services, right? Now, this is very important. You must have heard about the air traffic controllers, right? So it is actually a part of the Airport Authority of India. Now, it control and manages the Indian airspace extending beyond the territorial limits as accepted by International Civil Aviation Organization. So this is also an important organization. Do read about it. Next, we have got the ASEAN Development Bank, a very important multilateral institution. Now, this was established in the year 1966 as an multilateral international development bank, right? Now, the primary mission is to foster economic growth and cooperation. Focus is upon the Asia and the Pacific, right? So do remember. So it assists the members and the partners by providing loans, technical assistance, grants, and equity investment so as to propel the socio-economic growth, right? Socio-economic development. Financing to certain private sectors. So sometimes it also caters to the need of the private sector. Now, the headquarters are in Manila. Do remember, it's in Philippines. So the total number of members are 68, and they are not just restricted to the Asia Pacific regions. Some of the members are also from the outside this particular region. Next, it is run by a board of governors, represents the member countries. ADB's 5 largest shareholders are, do remember, Japan and US, each with 15.6% of the shareholding. People's Republic of China 6.4, India 6.3, Australia 5.8. Source of funding are voluntary contributions made by different countries, or it is also dependent upon the loan repayment. So once it gives a loan, then if the country paybacks the loan with interest, so that is also a source of its funding. That is it for today. I hope you like the session. Thank you.